Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Claire Anderson always thought she had a solid life with Sid Miller. He was the kind of man who gave off a sense of security, respected businessman, quiet and dependable, someone who rarely let daily chaos rattle him. Their marriage had been going for several years now, and to everyone else, it looked stable. Sid traveled for work often, but Claire saw that as just part of the life they'd built together. She kept the house in order, stayed in touch with the neighbors, and at work, people saw her as a dedicated woman, the wife of a successful man. Everything seemed normal, until a small change began to creep into her routine, quiet and almost unnoticeable. Tim Parker, her neighbor and also a co-worker, had a different kind of energy. He had a way of talking that caught your attention, always knew exactly what to say to compliment you, always had that one sharp observation that made Claire feel truly seen. At first, she thought it was just common politeness, but slowly, it started to mean more. She noticed how consistent it was. A comment about her outfit, another about her work ethic, a glance that lingered longer than usual. And instead of going unnoticed, it began to stir something she hadn't felt at home in a long time, the feeling of being admired. Sid, as dependable as he was, had drifted away emotionally. He was always focused on business, always on his phone or scheduling meetings. Claire couldn't remember the last time he genuinely complimented her. Their conversations revolved around bills, appointments, and trips. Inside her, a kind of emptiness was growing, one she wouldn't admit out loud, but one that left her vulnerable. And into that space, Tim stepped in. It all started subtly. In the office hallways, when they passed each other, Tim made it a point to stop and say something that would make her smile for the rest of the day. Sometimes it was just a short sentence, but full of attention. Other times, it was a joke that let her forget, for a moment, the weight of her routine. In the neighborhood, when neighbors gathered for small get-togethers, Tim always found a way to pull her into a conversation, like he could create a private world even in the middle of a crowd. Claire tried to set boundaries in her mind. She reminded herself she was married, that her life was already built, that this was nothing more than a closer friendship. But her feelings didn't follow her logic. With every casual encounter, she felt a little spark of anticipation, a nervous flutter in her stomach that mixed with guilt. No matter how much she told herself it wouldn't make sense to give in, the truth was something was already happening, even without a single touch. Tim seemed to know exactly where to aim. He never came on too strong, never crossed the line in an obvious way. The secret was in the balance. He was always there, always attentive, but careful not to let anyone else notice. That skill made him even more dangerous, because it turned their connection into something only the two of them understood. And that deepened the bond. Claire began questioning what she really wanted. Was it just attention, or was there something deeper inside her, something she didn't want to admit? The truth was, every compliment from Tim carried double weight because it was measured against Sid's silence. Every lingering look became an answer to the lonely nights when she fell asleep alone while her husband was in another city. It was as if Tim was filling a space Sid had left empty, not because he stopped loving her, but because he stopped showing up. The danger was in that contrast. When she came home and looked at Sid, she felt a mix of gratitude and disconnection. He was still the man who offered stability, but he wasn't the man who made her feel alive anymore. And that duality started eating away at how she saw her marriage. The simple thought of seeing Tim the next day became a secret motivation. So, between innocent conversations and looks that said more than words, the line between respect and temptation began to fade. Claire found herself in dangerous territory, but also strangely fascinated, as if a part of her that had been asleep had suddenly woken up. What had started as simple words and small gestures had become something that took up too much space in her mind. And right there, her life, once calm and predictable, started taking on a new color, a quiet risk she still believed she could control, but which would soon prove much bigger than she imagined. The first kiss happened on an ordinary night, after a meeting that seemed to drag on forever. The office was nearly empty, and Claire was getting ready to leave when Tim called her over to go over a detail in a report. It was quick, unexpected, but full of a desire that had been building for weeks. Claire was stunned for a few seconds, shocked by his boldness, and even more shocked that she'd responded without hesitation. What had been silent tension turned into a moment that couldn't be erased. On the way home, she could still feel her lips burning and her heart racing, like she'd crossed a border she'd always believed was uncrossable. After that day, the meetings became inevitable. There were no big plans at first, just the coincidence of being in the same place at the right time. A coffee break that stretched too long, a light touch on the arm that looked innocent to anyone watching, but meant so much more to them. With each new moment, the sense of danger grew, and that made everything even more thrilling. Claire found herself getting deeper in, like a part of her had woken up after years of silence. The meetings escalated quickly. Whenever Sid traveled, Tim would show up casually, always with a ready excuse if anyone asked. At first, Claire resisted the idea of bringing him to her house, but the familiarity and trust they'd built broke that barrier down. The bedroom they shared, the most protected space of their marriage, became the stage for secret moments. The simple act of lying in the same bed she shared with her husband while being with another man carried a huge weight, but the intensity of the experience drowned out any guilt trying to surface. The contrast between the two worlds became more obvious every day. During the day, Claire played the role of the devoted wife, managed the house, and listened to Sid's formal conversations, always about business. At night, or on weekends when Sid was away, she gave herself over to the fire of a hidden relationship that made her feel desired, alive, and free. It was like there were two versions of her, the respectable wife everyone knew, and the passionate lover living in secret. She tried to convince herself she still loved Sid. She told herself the marriage remained intact because, despite everything, there was still respect and consideration. But in her heart, there was no room left for certainty. The truth was, even as she tried to set limits, being with Tim became addictive. He knew how to compliment her, how to make her laugh, how to awaken a side of her life that had seemed forgotten. It was more than physical desire, it was the feeling of being seen and valued. With each of Sid's trips, Claire felt less guilty. The meetings that once felt risky became part of her routine. The secret wasn't just a betrayal anymore, it had become a way of life she'd embraced without realizing it. Still, in quiet moments alone, she'd reflect on the path she was on. She'd wonder how long she could keep up the act, how long she could live a double life without everything coming out. But as soon as Tim sent a message or showed up at her door, all doubts vanished, and she gave in again to the storm he brought. The excuses she made to herself were flimsy, but convincing enough to quiet her conscience. She told herself she needed this to fill the emptiness Sid had left, that it was just a way to feel alive again, that she could keep it all secret without consequences. But every lie told to Sid, every made-up excuse, added weight to a growing web of deception. What had started as a single slip had turned into a pattern. Claire knew full well she was crossing a line that was getting more dangerous, but the desire to stay in this game of passion was stronger than any fear. The double life, which had seemed impossible at first, now felt natural. She didn't realize that while she thought she was in control, someone was watching her every move, waiting for the right moment to act. The day everything collapsed came without warning. Claire was with Tim in the bedroom when she heard the doorknob turn. The sound was short, confident, like someone opening their own home with no hesitation. Sid walked in. He stopped in the doorway, looked for a second, and didn't need to ask anything. The scene spoke for itself. Claire pulled the sheet up out of reflex, Tim scrambled for his shirt at the foot of the bed. Sid locked eyes with both of them and broke the silence with a simple sentence that sounded like a verdict, "Both of you, outside." Without raising his voice, he walked to the closet, took out Claire's robe, and laid it on the bed. "Put this on." He turned to Tim, "Your clothes are on the floor. You go first." Tim opened his mouth to explain, but Sid raised his hand, signaling silence with a quick gesture. There was no room for words. It was clear this conversation wouldn't happen here. Tim gathered his clothes in a hurry, avoiding Sid's gaze. Claire stood up, tied the robe, and felt the weight of the fabric remind her she was at home, in her room, yet completely exposed, like she was on a stage she never chose. As Tim walked through the living room, Sid pointed to the door. "Out the back. And don't come back." Tim walked down the hall and disappeared. Sid then turned to Claire. He stood firm, like he'd rehearsed every word so none would be a pointless attack. "Your ring." He held out his open hand, waiting. Claire looked at the ring for a moment, as if memories were glued to her finger. She carefully took it off and placed it in his palm. He closed his fingers without looking at it. "Now the keys." She obeyed, took the keychain from the side table, and handed it over. He removed the house key, put it in his pocket, and gave the others back. "Phone." Claire handed it over. Sid checked the screen, turned off the home Wi-Fi on her phone, typed in a code, and returned it. "You're leaving through the front door. I'll lock up behind you." She tried to form a sentence. She wanted to say it was a mistake, that she could explain, that there was still something worth saving. His face stayed blank, not from coldness, but from control. This wasn't about yelling. He was here to make a decision. "Put on a coat." He opened the closet in the living room, took out a long coat, and handed it to her. "You're leaving now." When the front door opened to the street, the neighbors reacted almost instantly. Doors cracked open, curtains moved, whispers spread. The couple from number 14 stopped talking on the sidewalk. The woman with the golden retriever held her dog tighter, staring with poorly hidden shock. The image of Claire, wearing a robe under a coat, hair hastily tied up, instantly became neighborhood news. Sid stayed in the doorway, keeping his distance. The message was clear: the house now had new boundaries, and he was the guardian. Tim, who had been waiting near the side fence, risked calling her name. Before she could respond, Sid spoke clearly: "You go home. You don't step on this property today." Tim hesitated, gathered what dignity he could, and headed for the gate. Claire took a deep breath and stepped down, feeling the ground like it was foreign territory. She heard the lock turn behind her. The sound was final. Right there, in the middle of public embarrassment, a small story was born, one Claire would remember for a long time. Ruth Coleman, the elderly neighbor who always offered cake in the afternoons, came out with a brown coat over her arm and a look of pity that didn't humiliate, but didn't soften anything either. "Want some water?" she asked, sincerely. Claire nodded in thanks, and for a moment, she thought she might collapse into Ruth's arms, looking for shelter. Instead, Ruth put the coat over Claire's, squeezed her shoulders, and whispered, "Don't argue with him now. Go somewhere safe. Think later." Ruth's small story had a beginning, middle, and end in minutes. She showed up, offered care, and stepped back without judgment, leaving a sentence that stuck in Claire's mind like advice from someone who's seen it all. But the street had other eyes. Harper from number 9 was quietly filming with her phone low, half hidden behind the iron gate. Dean, the neighbor who treated his lawn like a temple, whispered something to his wife, who covered her mouth in shock. Some felt sorry for her, others raised their eyebrows in disapproval, and many started building their own versions of what had happened. In that neighborhood, reputations were built like high walls, and once cracked, the sound of the fall spread fast. Claire tried to speak to Sid again, still on the sidewalk, careful not to step into his space. "I need to get my things." He kept his calm gaze. "You'll come back later for what's yours." "I won't touch anything. Today, you leave." She swallowed the tears fighting their way up. In that moment, she knew any longer sentence would only make it worse. She pulled out her phone, opened a ride app, and confirmed the address of the nearest hotel. While waiting, she felt the weight of so many choices hardening on her shoulders. Tim reappeared a few feet away, clearly lost. "I can take you," he offered. Claire shook her head, not saying a word. He understood that being near her now would only make things worse. He walked away slowly, glancing back until he disappeared down the street. The ride arrived, a regular sedan. The driver looked at the scene with quiet curiosity, like someone who knows private lives sometimes spill out the front door. Claire got in, closed the door, and asked to go. In the rearview mirror, she saw Sid still in the doorway, motionless like a marker dividing two eras. Inside the car, her hands trembled. She tried to make a quick plan: where to sleep, who to call, what to say at work if anyone asked why she was gone. Each question opened space for a memory: the first time Tim complimented her hairstyle, the first late-night message, the first excuse she told herself. And behind it all, the sharp image of Sid, silent, making decisions with firm control. That image hurt more than shouting ever could, because it showed there was no loss of control. There was a clear choice. When the car turned the corner, Claire got a message. It was from Sid, short and direct: "Tonight, you stay somewhere else. Tomorrow we'll talk about how to get your things." She felt a flash of relief that she wasn't being cut off from her belongings, mixed with a pain that scratched at her chest, because the tone made it clear their relationship had changed. She rubbed her forehead, asked the driver to lower the air, and tried to breathe better. Her body was still reacting to the shock, and her mind struggled to keep up with how fast everything had happened. Arriving at the hotel was less of a shock than she expected. She checked in with her voice cracking once, signed the form firmly, and got her room key. When the door closed behind her, the first tear fell. It wasn't for Tim. It was for the house, for the photos in the living room, for the table with coffee cup rings, for the small habits that had quietly become memories. She sat on the edge of the bed and stayed silent for a few minutes, not to organize her thoughts, but because thoughts gave way to a tiredness that had been building long before that day. She called her mom and almost hung up before the first ring. She decided to go through with it. She kept it brief, no details. Her mom was shocked, asked basic questions, offered a place to stay. Claire thanked her and said she needed one night alone. She promised to call the next day. She hung up and finally breathed deeply, like someone who'd made it through a narrow hallway and reached a space where they could breathe, at least for a few hours. That same night, 3 messages came from different numbers: Harper asking if she was okay, a coworker checking in about Sid, and Ruth sending just one line: "Bring the coat back whenever you want. No rush." Claire smiled faintly at the gesture. In that mix of voices, there was gossip, curiosity, and care. The care came from the person she least expected. She put the phone on the nightstand and stared at the ceiling. Her mind replayed the scene at the doorway: Sid's hand reaching for the ring, the lock turning. Those 3 images formed a tripod everything else now rested on. As she tried to sleep, she realized something simple and devastating: Sid had stepped out of the role of husband and into the role of someone managing consequences. There was no bargaining, no demand for explanations, no performance for an audience. He observed, made a decision, and carried it out. Outside, the street whispered. Inside, he redefined boundaries as calmly as someone signing a document. And that was what hurt most: the end of their romance didn't come in a fight, it came in management. Claire wrapped herself in the hotel blanket and closed her eyes. Her body gave in. The sound of doors closing in the hallway mixed with the echo of the lock in her mind, repeating over and over. It was the sound that separated before from after. The morning after the hotel, Claire received an email from a law office with a straightforward subject: initial separation actions. Inside was a simple schedule: time to retrieve belongings, a list of what each would keep, instructions about cards and accounts. Attached was a file with records she never imagined existed, discrete photos of the affair, message timestamps, dates matched with Sid's trips. The report was signed by Naomi Briggs, a private investigator. The first page described the case's origin with a sentence that cut deeper than the images. Client noticed changes in routine and a drop in affection at home. Requested investigation after a neighbor reported unusual hours for coworker Tim Parker. A neighbor had seen Tim lingering around the street during the early hours when Sid was away. Claire read that with a knot rising from her stomach to her throat. She remembered the day she opened the gate for Tim because he said he'd forgotten his coat in the car and asked to store it in the garage. The file showed nothing had been accidental. There was a second folder with simple, direct contracts. Sid had already cancelled joint cards and kept only the ones for her personal use. The house locks had been changed, but the email listed a safe time for her to collect clothes and personal items, as long as she brought someone to accompany her. "Bring a friend or your mother," said the message from lawyer Jordan Blake. "Mr. Miller won't be there. Items will be sorted by room." Claire felt anger and a strange relief at the same time. Angry that her life was being organized by third parties. Relieved that nothing would be thrown out. Sid had chosen order over revenge. That same afternoon, Tim insisted on seeing her. He set up a meeting in a parking lot behind a distant cafe, swearing they could explain everything and that Sid would back down once he cooled off. Claire showed up. Tim spoke fast, like he was trying to save his own ego. He promised to fix everything, with a common story about people giving in to temptation and regretting it. This small story began and ended in 15 minutes. She listened, asked him to stop, posed one question: "Would you do for me what I just read Sid is doing?" And watched his confidence fade. Tim stammered, offered vague promises and shelter. Claire realized right then that the romance she thought was big fit entirely into the pocket of an excuse. She ended it, left without looking back. Her affair with Tim ended simply compared to the damage it caused. On the day set for collecting her things, Ruth Coleman was waiting outside. She didn't say much, just, "Today you take what's yours. Tomorrow you decide who you want to be." Ruth walked with her for a few minutes, not intruding. Inside the house, everything was labeled. Paintings they'd bought together were separated for future division. Claire's clothes were in boxes with her name. On the kitchen counter, a plain brown envelope. Back at the hotel, she opened the main file and found a document dated 2 months before the confrontation. Title: Vow Renewal, Script and Guest List. It had Sid's notes about an intimate dinner, paid reservations, a draft speech thanking Claire for her patience with his travels, mention of a weekend he planned just for them. In plain letters, a sentence that shattered any excuse she still held: "I promise to be present, not just an organized absence." Right below, the sharp turn, dates crossed out, reservations cancelled, first transfer to the lawyer's office, proposal for a separation contract. In 2 pages, the arc of a heart that planned a celebration and, in the same month, planned a clean break. This was the twist that hurt Claire most, because it showed Sid's silence had started with a dream of a fresh start, and ended with a plan for a clean exit. Naomi's file had a final note, a rare personal paragraph in a report: "I noted the client maintained respectful conduct throughout the investigation. Twice, I advised against confronting. He replied, I prefer proof over spectacle. The truth is enough." That explained the scene at the doorway, the hand reaching for the ring, the lock turning. Sid had chosen the path that best protected himself, and in a way, also protected Claire from the worst kind of scene. The plan was simple and just cruel enough: gather proof, deliver it, step away. No calculated humiliation, no public exposure beyond what the neighborhood's gossip would create on its own. The months that followed were step by step. She returned Ruth's coat and brought a simple cake in thanks. Ruth shared a short story from her youth: a husband who failed, a second chance, a life rebuilt on 2 conditions: truth and therapy. "Dignity is a daily choice," she said, wishing Claire peace to make better choices. This small story wasn't meant to excuse Claire, it was meant to remind her that life goes on, and strong people rebuild by owning their actions. Meanwhile, the neighborhood wrote its own fable. Harper stopped filming and, weeks later, knocked on the door of Claire's new apartment with an awkward apology. I spread it. I acted on impulse. I deleted the video. Claire accepted the apology without drama. The conversation lasted 5 minutes and ended with a short nod. Another small story closed, an audience recognized itself as an audience and stepped back. At work, the transfer placed Claire under a demanding but fair boss, Alicia Grant, who set clear goals and boundaries. Here it's productivity and respect. Deal with the rest outside, she said on the first day. Claire threw herself into the new team, submitted reports on time, blocked Tim's contacts, changed passwords, switched her personal email, avoided side conversations. The demanding routine slowly gave way to a thin but real thread of stability. On the most exhausting nights, her eyes burned and guilt tried to surface. On some of those days, a bank transfer arrived with no name, always the same amount, the exact monthly cost of the health plan they'd shared. The lawyer explained, he's covering it for 6 months. It's his decision. After that, you take over. Sid was paying for a kind of bridge so she could reach solid ground. He didn't ask for thanks. He just did it. The supermarket meeting happened by chance months later, in the canned goods aisle. Sid came with a list in hand and a nearly empty cart. He saw Claire, lifted his chin in greeting, and said, "Good afternoon, Claire." The tone was polite, distant. She replied, and for a moment, they had nothing to say. He broke the silence with a line that could fit on any wall calendar, but carried the weight of real life. This all ends better when we stop telling versions and start telling truth. He put 2 cans in his cart, said, "Take care," and walked on. No moral lecture, no scolding, no sarcasm. Just the reminder of the man who chose his own way out of the story, without noise. That same night, Claire found an envelope from Jordan Blake's office in her mailbox. Inside was the final agreement and an attachment she hadn't seen, a receipt from a florist dated before the investigation, paid by Sid, for a dinner that never happened. Attached to the receipt was a printed draft of his vow renewal speech, now with a handwritten line, scribbled quickly, like it was written over tears: "When our love fails, we try before we let go." The paper had a crease and a circular stain that looked like a cup mark. Below it, a short note in his handwriting: "I chose to protect my peace and your chance. The rest is up to you." It was the final blow, and at the same time, the opening to the lesson that would close this chapter. The betrayal cost her home, relationships, reputation, the weight of hearing her name become sidewalk gossip. It also cost her the image she had of herself. In return, she gained a frameless mirror. Choices come with consequences, and real love avoids turning debt into a spectacle. Sid's quiet plan wasn't weakness, it was method. And the price Claire paid taught her something no apology speech could: whenever someone opens the door and shows you the way out with dignity, it's an invitation to grow. Claire signed the agreement, deleted Tim's number, kept the note, and decided the rest of her story would have a different kind of beginning. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.